Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of the Diverse Stars podcast, third season. How my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. This is an amazing episode because Cullen Bunn returns to the mothership to discuss Gatchaman and Long Haul. Now, come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Bunn. Thank you so much for coming back to the Diverse Stars podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's totally my pleasure. So one thing I think I mentioned the last time you were on the show, you're like an extremely prolific writer. You do a lot of books. So when you're making your decisions on which books to work on, such as Gatchaman, and we'll talk about Long Haul, how are you making those decisions, and why did you choose Gatchaman as one of your projects you wanted to work on?
You know, it's interesting because as a younger writer, I would have probably said, well, I just take everything because, I want to work on all these projects.
Yeah.
But that's no longer the case. And it's not about, and in some cases it's not, it's not that I don't want to work on all these projects because I usually do, but it's just having the bandwidth or being the right creator for a project. And these days I work primarily on creator owned stuff and a few licensed projects or work for hire projects. With Gatchaman, it was a pretty easy decision for me only because I loved the Gatchaman mythology from when I was a kid. Now, when I watched it as a kid, it wasn't Gatchaman, it was Battle of the Planets. But I loved it, and I loved it so much. I've followed it over, decades. I've kept up with what's going on with in the world of Gatchaman or Battle of the Planets. So when Mad Cape contacted me and asked if I'd ever heard of the property, I was like, yes, 1,000 times yes. I know Gatchaman, and I'm in. I just so sometimes it's my own fandom that draws me to a project, and in this case, it definitely was my own fandom of the project, and some nostalgia for it, and seeing some potential for doing some interesting things within the world of Gatchaman.
Now, when you're writing for a project that you personally have a connection to, like Gatchaman or Battle of the Planets, is it easy? Does that make it easier or harder to write the comic book, knowing that your connection to what you remember is so strong?
It doesn't make it easier or more difficult, but it is something that I always have to keep in mind, right? I mean, there are things like, I remember rushing off the school bus to get inside in time to see this show when it was coming on. And then when I rewatched it, there's a lot of things that I didn't remember correctly, or things were very different than what my memory had painted. So, no matter what, you have to keep that nostalgia. You have to know you have to keep it in check because you have to know when to embrace it and when to lean into it and when to kind of dial it back and try something that might be a little different or might be new that nostalgia alone wouldn't necessarily support.
Hmm. So one thing interesting about the Gatchaman comic book, if I read the solicit correctly, it's an in continuity comic book that you're working on for Gatchaman. So you're talking about a show that's been around for a long time. You're writing this new series, I assume, to also attract new readers. So
Yes.
how do you write a story with that level of history to it, that level of connection to you personally, and with that fan base, but at the same time make it so someone like me can walk in and go, "Oh, this is what it is. I can buy the first issue and get it."
Yeah. And that's probably what I would consider the biggest challenge of a book like this is the stories we're working on take place within the original, I think it's 150 episode run of Gatchaman. And everything has to take place within that time frame. But it was really important to me that when you pick up Gatchaman number 0, which just came out, or Gatchaman number 1, which comes out very soon, um, I gave you everything you needed to know about that show or about that book and about the team and about the world and who they were. And for that, I really leaned into the feel of the animated series because the animated series it had a narrator who would say, and here they are, Team Gatchaman, and here's who they are. But I mean, and that's when I was growing up reading comics. That's the way comics were. When I picked up an issue of X-Men, it didn't matter what issue of X-Men I picked up. I could tell you right away that Cyclops had force beams that were contained by the ruby red visor. And because it was, we were told those things.
Yeah.
And I wanted this comic to have that feel. I wanted it to be something that someone could pick up regardless of what issue they pick up. And even though it's a continuing story, they could be caught up to speed pretty quickly. And especially the 0 issue and the #1 issue. Both of those tell you exactly who the team members are. I was just rereading the issue 1 today because we're doing like final editing proofs. And I'm like, oh yeah, I put down when June the Swan comes up. Here's June the Swan. Guess what vehicle she drives? Guess what her specialties are? You're gonna know all these things right away. And you're gonna know who the Science Ninja team is and what they represent. And I just wanted to really lean into, if you've never watched Gatchaman, it doesn't matter. You can still read this and enjoy it. And that's really what I wanted for the book.
So the other challenge I think that you had, I mean, having not been the one who wrote it myself, I assume it's a challenge for you, is that you're also talking about a series that is older. I mean, it's not like a recent series. We're talking, I think was it the 80s most of this was done?
Try 70. I think it's
70s.
70
Okay,
or
so it's even older than I am.
71.
So
Yeah,
the series
70
older
or
than I am.
71 is when it came out originally.
So, but you're writing it for a 2024 audience,
Mhm.
but you're keeping it in continuity. So, how do you write a series for a modern audience while keeping it in the style and continuity of a show that's older than I am?
Well, there's some interesting things about it. First of all, from a visual aspect, we kind of leaned in and embraced the visual look of Gatchaman because Gatchaman takes place in the 70s. It took place in a near future real world Earth, but none of the cities, I mean, all the cities are unique to the world of Gatchaman. They never name, say, New York City or Tokyo. You know, it's all these different crazy names. So they kind of lean into it wasn't quite our world. But I also like that had this sort of 70s retro vibe that I think still works. And we all know how fashion and fads go in
Mhm.
and out of style. So who's to say that in the near future of the Gatchaman universe, these fashions and these fads aren't back again. But beyond that, Gatchaman kind of was a way ahead of its time in terms of its themes. There was a lot of environmentalism in Gatchaman. It was a big part of the Gatchaman story, which I think resonates today still. There's a lot of that. The villains are terrorist organizations who are using science to destroy us, and then the good guys are using science to save us. And I think that resonates. And then, from a Gotchman was a surprisingly violent show compared to say Battle of the Planets, which was the Americanized version. These characters, sometimes they have to take a life in order to save millions. They have to take lives, and you get to see, that was happening even in 71 or whatever it was. Um, And then, also they drive, their weaponry and their vehicles are pretty super science, even by today's standards. So that part was it was both fun and it was to me that was not difficult to balance that.
So, the as you mentioned, the villains they're fighting, is it saying it right, Galactor? The Galactor?
Galactor, yeah.
Backdoor. And you mentioned they're a terrorist organization, which in the 70s has a much different connotation than in 2024. So was
Yes.
that a difficult thing to walk, or did you decide, just once again embrace what it is what it is, and keep going with how we understood it from the 70s show?
So I think for that one, I definitely wanted it to be a little lighter. I wanted it to feel a little lighter. So I leaned into the old, what Galactor originally was. And really, for people who aren't familiar with Galactor, They're Cobra from GI Joe before Cobra was Cobra. I mean, it's very much a Cobra type organization of super terrorists, and just because I love that whole vibe, I was into it. I was like, yeah, I'll go with it. So yeah, Galactor they are a group of fringe scientists who use their science to create. I mean, mainly their plans always end up being let's create a mecha to destroy some city. Um, but they also have great commanders, and all their commanders wear strange headgear. They were always a little, they always had sort of a surreal, weird vibe to them, and I wanted to lean into that. And they're controlled by aliens from another galaxy.
Of
So
course.
yes,
Well, it kind of reminds me for fans of Marvel, AIM. That would be also a decent analogy.
a great a great correlation if AIM loved to make mechas that were animal themed and sick them on the world. So
Now, another interesting thing that Matt Cave is doing, I'm guessing, is that it sounds like Gatchaman is going to be a franchise, or at least like an expanded universe. I know there's a book by Tommy Lee Edwards called Gatchaman Can Deathmatch.
yes.
So how tightly tied are these books? How much of expansion are we going to be looking at from Gatchaman? And are you going to be working or supervising this expansion?
Well, so I'm writing the main Gatchaman ongoing series. And then Tommy Lee Edwards and Steve Orlando are jumping in to do a number of one shots and limited series that also take place within the universe. And we meet and we talk about what we're going to be doing. And what's really cool about it is all these books have very different vibes. They kind of have a different, Steve, for instance, we've got Tommy Lee Edwards with that Ken book has got some of the craziest stuff in it. It's awesome. It's like a tribute to blood sport movies like Bloodsport or Kickboxer, but set in this science fiction heavy world. And then Steve is doing a book called a Galactor miniseries that really digs deep into the villains
Yeah.
and how insanely evil they are. And he really embraces that, which is awesome. And then the Gatchaman series that I'm doing, I kind of envision it closer to an interpretation. It's new. These aren't adaptations. These are new stories, but it's closer to the animated series. I wanted it to really feel like episodes of the original animated series. And characters that I introduce and themes that I introduce in the ongoing series will start showing up in some of these spin-off books. Some of them may be the main characters will be getting their own spin-offs from time to time. But then some of the new characters that are coming up will be getting their own spin-offs and things like that as well.
But the Gatchaman you're working on is an ongoing, or is it a miniseries?
Ongoing,
It is ongoing.
ongoing series.
Like how far ahead are you planned so far on it?
So I'm planned for 2 years minimum. I've got a 2 year plan for or 24 issues. Who knows with release schedules? I've got 24 issues worth of story planned right now, and we could go beyond that. But that would, the 24 issues will tell like this. I have sort of this overarching story. The elements of are going to be seeded in the first issue and then paying off across those 24 issues.
Now I read the solicit for Gatchaman #1, and I may have read into it too deeply. So if I have, please let me know. So, but I'm gonna read what it says. Okay.
All right, let's hear it.
And I'll ask my question. In the solicit, it states if they fail, just assume the battle plan of the Gatchaman main characters, who's waiting in the wings to take their place. And later in the same solicit mentions game-changing elements that enhance and expand the universe. Now, so to me, what this sounds like is that even though this is in continuity, you're planning for a new cast of characters who are taking over the group in the future, or maybe in the near future because it's in the first issue solicit. Are we looking to a pretty early change of status quo in these characters?
I so you very very astute reading into the solicits. I can tell you that yes, there are some changes to the status quo. Uh, the licensor has been very, very good to us in terms of allowing us to do some new things in this world. And yeah, one of the things that immediately dawned on me when I first started working on the project was, here are uh, these five heroes that are going on these death-defying missions. But what happens if they don't make it back? And that's something that kind of really resonated with me and set up a lot of moving parts that go forward. As soon as you start reading the first issue, it's laid out pretty quickly in the first issue that um, there are others who are trained to be the new team, new science ninja team.
Now, are we looking at a giant size X-Men #1 situation?
I can't reveal that far ahead, but that would kind of be awesome. If I get a cover that's like an homage to Giant Size X-Men,
Now,
but yeah, we're definitely, like I said, there are some brand new characters that never appeared in the animated series, but are going to be an official part of the Gatchaman universe.
so I'm going to poke at you one more time on a little bit more on this, if that's okay.
Sure.
Now, my other question I had is a phrase that you used to discuss the Gatchaman series that it exists within continuity. If we are looking at this change of status quo, now we're going beyond the continuity and doing new stories that come after the series that when it ended. Is that correct or not correct?
So everything I'm doing, at least right now, and who knows at the end of 24 issues, what will happen. Everything I'm doing takes place within the initial run of the series. Now that does not mean, certain characters, you know, may have a life outside of that 150 episodes, right? But in my book, at least, it's what's happening during that 150, that original run.
All right, one last poke. Since you said my book does this, so that assumes that there's other people might be doing books that then go after.
Well, it's possible. I think initially, and I don't want to speak too far because there's already rumblings of new things we could be doing with it. I think initially everyone's story takes place within that series, but again, I think I think everything's on the table. Everything I've seen so far with it and working with everybody, I think all possibilities are available.
So for Gatchaman, what can our listeners look forward to in the next upcoming issues? Like, what are we looking at an immediate change, or this is going, or how are we going to bring us into these first two issues of Gatchaman?
So we're gonna initially, as we dive into this series, we're gonna set it. I set it up as a very it's if you're familiar with Gatchaman, this will be a familiar scenario. I'm setting it up as, like I said, I want it to feel like the cartoon or the animated series or whatever you call it these days. I wanted it to feel like that, but elements immediately start weaving in that kind of set things up that things could be different. Now, again, if someone has never watched Gatchaman, it'll feel this is just the way it is. But for people who are really familiar with the history of Gatchaman, there's going to be some new elements within the first few pages. There are going to be things that start seeding in that you'll start seeing and start setting up sort of a snowball effect that's getting bigger and bigger, and story elements that will get bigger every arc. Um, but even beyond that, I'm trying to tell stories that's got mechas versus space, versus super jets and ninja action and ninjas sneaking into enemy fortresses. I've got all the things that make a good Gatchaman adventure. And then we're just adding more and more stuff to it. And then if I have my way, I'm going to punch the reader in the gut with some of the things that happen
Oh,
very soon. I mean,
okay.
look, I don't believe that I believe that a comic book creator collaborates with a lot of people. a writer collaborates with an artist and a letterer and an editor, but we also collaborate with the reader. But that doesn't mean it is not a completely non-adversarial relationship. And I do plan, if I have my way, I'm going to hurt the reader a little bit with some of the things that happen as the series goes along. And I get the feeling that readers will both hate me and like me for these things that I'm going to be for this torment I'm going to be inflicting upon them.
So, how does it feel to embrace the hate when it comes?
It, the thing you have to keep in mind, and I've been writing comics now for a while, and I've written, especially when you're writing for a much loved licensed property. The thing I always have to keep in mind is the reason that writers can and creators can generate sort of this animosity and this sometimes what feels like loathing. It doesn't ever have doesn't it's not necessarily comfortable, but the reason that those emotions come out is because people care about these characters. And that's great. I mean, that's fine, and I get it. It's also not my job to coddle people who care about the characters. I was not coddled when I was a young comic book reader. They did the most awful things to my favorite characters, and I loved it. And that's not going to change for me. The characters I love the most tend to suffer the greatest.
So, when is the first issue coming out of Gatchaman?
So the first issue comes out in June. I'm pretty sure it's June. I don't necessarily have the exact release date right in front of me. But I think it's issue 0 came out on Free Comic Book Day. And you can still get that issue 0, I'm sure, at some stores or online. And there's even, I think, some places where you can read it. You can read the digital version of it. And then issue 1 comes out June 26th. I just looked it up on my magical device. So the end of, I take it back. Gatchaman number 1. Yeah, Gatchaman number 1 hits on June 26th. And then not long after that, I think, is the Ken Deathmatch issue. But June 26th for number 1, and then we're rolling right along.
So, do you have time for me to ask you some questions about Long Haul?
Sure.
All right. So, for those who don't know, Long Haul is a graphic novel from Storm King Comics. And for those who don't know, Storm King Comics is a comic book company that's its owned or represented by John Carpenter. Right?
John Carpenter and Sandy King Carpenter founded it. Yeah.
So when you're thinking about Long Haul, how did you think about writing a story that is both your vision, but also can exist within the vision of a John Carpenter film?
Well, so when I first started working on Long Haul, I didn't have a publisher in mind. So my co-writer on the book is a good friend of mine, Heath Amodio, and he actually brought the first, like his first ideas for what we could do with Long Haul to me. He came to me and said, "Do you have any idea how many serial killers are said to be on the highways at any given time, today?" And it was some shocking, disturbing number. And we just started talking about how we turn that into a story. So we didn't necessarily, and as we were developing as a story, we didn't say, this is what it would be if it's if it's a book for John Carpenter's company. It just so happened that when we put it together, we were like, well, let's take this to Storm King and see what they say. And they thought it was right for their lineup. Sandy Carpenter really likes books that could take place in the real world. Her favorite horror stories are horror stories that can take place in our world. And that's sort of the marching orders for the dark and twisted line that they're publishing right now, is that we want them to be stories that could really happen. I think it just sparked with them immediately as soon as we sent it in, and then we started writing it. But it was never, I almost never do I sit down and say I'm going to write a book that's right for this publisher or this publisher. I usually want to write the book, or at least write the pitch and figure out what the story is before I take it to whichever publishers I think are right after it's in some shape.
Now, one interesting thing, so the story centers around a group of serial killers, a group called the Nine.
The nine, yes.
Um, so how connected are these serial killers? When I think about serial killers, I think sociopaths, I think ones that are not known to be very social creatures, they tend to be very isolated loners. So how connected are these nine serial killers? What is different about these serial killers that enables them or motivates them to be in a group?
So you're absolutely right. Most serial killers are very lone figures. But what we thought might be interesting and scary is if that wasn't necessarily the case in this world. So we have these two brothers, Danny and Carl, whose sister has vanished, and they're truckers and they want to find her. And what they discover is that it's not just that there are serial killers out there, but that some of these serial killers have organized. And when I was a kid, I was on the road a lot with my dad, and one of the things he really loved was the CB radio. And I really, I just remember all the community and the discussions that were going around. And on certain channels, there were hidden discussions that, you're on this channel, a completely different discussions taking place. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if through that, if that, through the CB radio became something a little more, something sinister formed out of that. And that's where this nine um, came together. And yeah, they're very organized. I mean, well, as organized as a group of killers like that. They're all out doing their own thing, but there's a little bit more of a community of it's such a sweet little community these serial killers have. There's a little more of a community among them, and they're more they're definitely in communication, and there are sort of cells rising up around these communities. So it causes a much bigger problem for our heroes the deeper they get into this dealing with this nine.
So I don't know if this is thinking too deeply into it, or maybe think on the wrong path on it. So Danny and Carl are definitely going to have to try to find Sarah, but also kill these nine. And I don't know why my brain came here, but my brain was thinking, if they're killing these nine, are they not then some level of serial killers?
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, what is it? The famous quote is, uh, what is, and I'm going to get it wrong when I don't remember who said it at this point. But he who hunts monsters must be careful not to become a monster
Right.
themselves, and uh, and that's definitely baked into this in a big way. Yeah, Danny and Carl, uh, they may be set out for the right reasons, but what their path is taking them to some dark places.
Because that's one thing I was wondering is when you think about Dan and Carl, and what they're once again, obviously their goal is to find Sarah. Though I will say, I can't remember what the rule of thumb is. Like after like 20 or 48 hours, the odds of finding the person alive is virtually
Yeah.
zero at that point. And I'm assuming at some point in the story they do get past that point. So the motivation to find her alive obviously is going to be at 40 hours is minimal. Is there a point where they find they're doing this because they either enjoy it or because it's something that they're now obsessed with?
Well, yeah, it becomes an obsession. It goes beyond. There's definitely a moment where they don't think they're going to find her anymore, but they're doing this out of the sort of hunger for vengeance, and this and obsession's a great way of putting it. It's an obsession to get revenge. And I think about it, if someone were to hurt some member of my family,
Hmm.
a close member of my family, there's almost no, I mean, I don't know what my limit would be in getting revenge. I don't know that there is a limit in the vengeance I would seek. I'm a vindictive person. If someone gets my order wrong at the at a restaurant, I mean, I'm definitely gonna, if someone were to hurt somebody, I think I might go to some pretty extreme lengths. So that's, every story you write, you're kind of exercising those demons and processing, thoughts. I'm processing things that are in my head. So this story helps me process some of that, and deal with some of the fears connected to that kind of thing.
So, how aware are Danny and Carl about the road they are headed down, and how are they attempting to preserve the humanity throughout it?
I think Danny and Carl, I don't think they ever speak. They never look at each other and say, "We're going to some bad places here. Maybe we should turn. Maybe we should turn back. Maybe we should give up on this." They do look at each other and say, "This is going to be bad. It's going to be awful. Let's go. We have some pain to dish out." Um, and I think at a certain point, the humanity they're trying to preserve is their sister.
Hmm.
And then at some point they realize, oh, she's gone. So we don't have to worry about preserving that humanity anymore. Let's get what we came, let's get what we came for, which is if it's not our sister, what we came for really from the very beginning is to get vengeance on the people
Hmm.
who did this to her, to us, and that's what they drive down that road.
But see, I think it brings up a fascinating philosophy about the perspective of Sarah if she does have a perspective on the situation. Because the one thing you think, what they say sometimes like she wouldn't be happy with what you did, but probably thinking, no, they actually did kill me. I'm probably quite happy with what they're doing. So I mean, is there like what is like from perspective of Sarah in the situation? What do you think? Do you think in that position should be I don't like what you did in my name, or do you think she'd be like those motherfuckers killed me? What do you do?
um, that's a good one. I think the family is kind of a tough as nails, take no prisoners family. So she probably would be all for they deserve this. They don't let them get away with what they've done.
Now, if memory serves, the long haul got released in March, right?
Yes.
In March. Are there thoughts about continuing into a second book with the characters or the storylines?
So I mean the original graphic novel tells a complete story, but we have Heath and I have definitely discussed, there are many paths we could go down to continue this, to continue the tale and take place in the world that we established. And it would just it's interesting because it just gets bigger, and we always said it's always going to be real world. It's never going to be, and the truckers were aliens from space. Although that, one of my favorite comic books of all time was US1 from Marvel, which were space truckers.
I don't know that one.
Eventually there were vampires in it, and
Really?
yeah, it only ran for 11 or 12 issues, but it was a
It
really cool book.
This sounds like there was a CrossFit combo that came out called Route 66.
Okay,
Did
so,
you? I don't know if
yeah,
you know that one. That was like in the late '90s when CrossGen. I don't know if you know CrossGen. CrossGen was like a big
yeah,
comic for me in the
I'm
'90s.
familiar with, yeah.
But I remember that series coming out too. That was all about the highway and all the stuff that comes along. And
Yeah,
that,
US1 was one of my favorite comics as a younger person. It was completely goofy fun, but I really enjoyed it. But so I don't know that we'd never veer into science fiction, but the world would definitely get the next book we do would definitely blow it out into a much bigger, stranger, more surreal surroundings, but we'd always keep it kind of grounded in reality.
so there is definitely a plan to go forward.
Well, we have a plan. I mean, I don't know if there's nothing in the works. Like, we're not scripting a new series or anything like that. Although I think we could it wouldn't take anything to convince Heath to start. I mean, it wouldn't take anything to convince Heath to start working right now. And I wouldn't be far behind. But we don't necessarily have anything on the books right now.
Well, when you do, you're gonna keep me posted because, like I said,
Absolutely.
I've had you on a couple of times. This is the second time, and I must say, big fan of your work. Thank you so much. Um, yeah. So yeah. Any news on Dark Arc, by the way?
No news right now. Nothing. No, I mean, I know that uh, a lot of people really want me to return to Dark Arc. I would love to see more Dark Arc. I just don't know what that looks like right now. Um, I obviously it's a concept that I really dig, and there's a lot more story to tell. Um, but I don't know what it looks like getting that out just now.
So, just as a warning, every time I interview, I'm going to ask you about Dark Arc again because I read
That's
the
fine.
book.
Maybe next time, there could be some Dark Arc news.
I would hope so. I would hope so. Mr. Bunn, absolutely honored to talk with you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a great night, sir.
You too.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Traverse the Stars podcast. Please help me battle the algorithms by liking and subscribing. Be sure to turn for the next episode when Andy Lanning and Ant Williams board the mothership to discuss Legendary, the fall of Mara from Meta Travelers. The next voyage, travel on.